Hello and welcome to Restoring Our American Republic. I'm Chuck Benoit with The Nature of Things, where we are realigning God, government, and natural law so that we might restore our American Republic. There are four spheres of government created by God. And even though many of us are concerned with only one, the other three are very, very important. In order for our society to flourish, it must do well in all four. First, there's the individual. We must govern ourselves with the goal of bringing stability and safety to those around us. A lot of influence is lost when this sphere is neglected. And then, secondly, the family, teaching our children to respect others and, of course, being respectful to one another in the family unit. Our family morals will impact society greatly. But then there's the church government, how we relate to God. And although many of us don't seem to have the time, still we would do well making this a high priority. But then finally, there is civil government, an area many of us are very concerned about. What keeps our society from developing into chaos? Unfortunately, it's not keeping us from chaos, but seems to be an area filled with great division. And one could build the case that this division began in the other spheres of government. We exempt ourselves from acting appropriately in public. We become a bad example for our family and neighbors. We feel the church is just not as important as politics. And if people disagree with our politics, they must be evil. And unfortunately, they may be. My point is that our state and our nation cannot be something other than who we are individually. And faith and family are the foundations of a nation such as ours. We need to do our part to hold on to these things. So, with that, welcome, Mr. Levine.
Well, good morning, Chuck. Great to see you today. That's an amazing opening monologue you have there. So today, Chuck, we're going to take a look at these closing days of the legislative session, which is, I was going to say likely, but I'm saying to you, going to be required to be extended, to be held over because the Florida House and the Florida Senate has not agreed on a budget. The budget has a $1 billion variance between the House and the Senate. So the legislature is required by Constitution in the state of Florida to balance its budget every legislative session. So looks like the legislative session is going to be held over, Chuck. And that goes into basically what you just got done talking about. Because if you don't mind, I'll take this opportunity to say, for example, today, for our viewers, we're going to talk about legislation that was passed in the Senate, but not taken up in the House. And my overlying comment over that is this. If the chambers of government, House and Senate, are not going to pay attention to the priorities of the other chamber, then the entire legislative session is a waste of time because legislation has to pass both houses or it cannot go to the governor's desk. So if you have a Speaker of the House or a President of the Senate who's not paying attention to the priorities of what's going on in the other chamber, which means you're not taking up legislation that is a high priority for the other chamber, then you, by definition, are wasting your time, Chuck.
Well, that could very well end up the case. A lot of wasted time. We have about a half dozen different bills that we just want to kind of talk about that have all six of them have passed the Senate and are not being taken up by the House by Danny
That's
Perez.
correct.
And
So, Chuck, I want to say one more thing before we move on,
sure.
is that may be the case, but it's not okay. We send people there for a reason. and that is to get things done. And if we intentionally manage those chambers of government in a way that we know in advance is not going to get things done, then that is an abuse of public resources, among other things, Chuck.
Okay. So the first one is a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, and this was released by the White House in 2022, and later proposed at a state level here in Florida. Why don't you tell us about this AI Bill of Rights and why it should be passed?
Well, in today's broadcast, Chuck, we're not going to get into the minutia of these bills. Okay, we're going to talk generally about these bills. So I ask our audience, is it important in this phase of technological development in the United States of America, which of Florida is a huge part, okay, probably being the, I guess, second or third most populous state, California, Texas, Florida, New York. So we're probably the third most populous state with the biggest budget. So I ask the audience, is it important that government regulates artificial intelligence while artificial intelligence is rapidly moving into our daily lives? My answer to that question, Chuck, is yes. We need to, I hate the word regulate, but we have to put some regulatory guardrails on AI so because they don't absolutely fleece us. And there's another bill that we're going to talk about this morning, which gives an example of how corporate America is very willing to do very bad things to everyday, ordinary people, Chuck. So my point to the audience is that we definitely need guardrails on artificial intelligence. You alluded to the fact that the federal government has thrown out or proposed some guidelines for the states, but I don't care what the federal government does. I care about what the state of Florida does. So yes, I am strongly in favor of the state of Florida passing legislation that regulates, puts guardrails on artificial intelligence so they don't abuse our children and unsuspecting adults, Chuck. So yeah, I think that's really important. And the Florida House is not cooperating with the Florida Senate. The Florida Senate has passed legislation through its chamber. And if the Florida House doesn't like the legislation that the Senate has passed, they should reconcile those interests between the House and Senate and get a bill on the governor's desk, Chuck.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And so we can move along to another Medical Freedom Act, SB 1756, which seeks to expand school vaccine exemptions, allowing parents to opt out based on personal or philosophical or conscience-based beliefs. And this is backed by Governor DeSantis. It also enables pharmacists to dispense ivermectin without a prescription. So why is this one important?
Well, it's important to those people who do not want to take vaccines because the government told them to. I am very strict personally about what medications I am willing to take and what I'm not. And I will tell you that I am myself personally, and it's not about me, but I'm just trying to, I mean, let's just say there's a lot of people in the world like me. We know that from COVID, that under no circumstances am I going to allow the government to tell me to put these highly technologically advanced vaccines into my body. I don't trust pharmaceutical companies. I don't trust the World Economic Forum or the United Nations or the Global Health Organization. I don't, so no. every time I have an opportunity to give people medical freedom, choice over what they put in their body, I'm going to opt for the option, not for the mandate, Chuck. So, yeah, the Florida House needs to get it together. And if there's things about the Senate bill they don't like, they need to reconcile with the Senate, get on the same page, and get this legislation on the governor's desk, Chuck.
Yes, well, it says here that opponents fear that this could reduce vaccination rates and worsen existing measles outbreaks. Um, I don't know. I haven't really heard much about measles. Of course, I don't hang around with a lot of kids anymore, families with kids, but I'm
Well,
not
that's
hearing a
because
lot.
we've been vaccinating for it for the whole time. But honestly and
Right.
truly, I think personally, I am much more. I believe that we have much better ability to cope with the outbreak than we are. I think I think that the solution is worse than the problem, in my opinion. And just because you give people the choice to not vaccinate does not mean that they will choose to not vaccinate, but families and individuals need to have the choice of which vaccines they take and which vaccines they don't, in my opinion. I don't want the government telling me to put anything in my body, Chuck.
Yeah, I get it, and I mean, I don't like getting the annual flu shots or anything like that. I don't do it. I've never done it. Um,
I've
and
never done it.
yeah. So I'm kind of in agreement with the idea that we should be able to decide for ourselves on that.
And you know what? We can come out with education campaigns and all other kinds of ways to educate people. It would raise competition in the pharmaceutical companies for different vaccines. If people don't like something in particular about a particular vaccine, a competitor will create a vaccine that doesn't have those elements or those components. And it just opens the choice is everything in this country. Competition is everything in this country. And without freedom of choice, we crush the innovation and productivity that is the United States of America. So give people choices about what they put in their bodies and what they don't. I would suggest those measles vaccines are probably decades old and probably could stand to be reinvented.
Or something like that. Well, not to lose sight of the ivermectin access, I think that's a really good idea too, because I know that I ended up with, I had a mild case, I think, of COVID. It was very mild because it wasn't nearly as bad as most, but my doctor gave me ivermectin and I got over it very, very quickly. So just another
Yeah, the
aspect of that.
problem with ivermectin, Chuck, is it solves too many problems.
Yeah, yeah, right. I'll go
Yeah,
along
don't
with
give
that.
people ivermectin. They may not need any other drugs.
There you go. There you go.
Just
So,
saying.
well, let's move along here to developer fees. Refer to the compensation paid to a developer for their services, which typically cover overhead and project management. And what this legislation will do is eliminate for these forever developer free fees.
Let me tell you a quick story. This is the legislation I was telling you about that would exemplify how willing corporate America is to hurt you and harm you. Years ago, there was legislation proposed in the Florida legislature that gave developers a 1 or 1.5% fee on every future real estate transaction that happened. Every time the deed transferred, so for example, Lennar is one of the companies who likes these forever fees. Okay, so let's say you're a Lennar, you buy a house in a Lennar community. Lennar, and let me just be careful about that because I don't know specifically, but I do believe that Lennar was involved in it. But they're not the only builders that were doing it. Okay, but long story short, um, let's say that a builder builds out a residential single family home neighborhood. They wanted to put a provision on the deed that says every time that deed transfers, they get 1.5% of the purchase price. That's called a forever fee. That means that every single time, I just explained it, so I don't need to explain it again. But I find that to be pretty horrific. On the other hand, when that was going on, I was sitting on the board of directors of the Florida Association of Realtors. And there was a lot of people on the board of directors of Florida Realtors that supported that. I thought it was atrocious. I don't know how you feel about it, but can you imagine that every time, like you buy a house from a builder today and you live in it for 5 years and you transfer it to somebody else and the builder gets another point or point and a half, and then 5 years from then somebody else sells it, they get another point or point and a half, and this thing goes out 30 years and it sells again and they're still getting a point and a half on every transfer? That's called a forever fee, Chuck. Okay. And I mean, honestly, I mean, the word Ponzi scheme comes to mind. And I know this is not a direct correlation to a Ponzi scheme, but it definitely is a wealth creation tool where you're getting paid basically royalties on other people's business in perpetuity, which I am strongly against. How about you, Chuck?
Yeah, well, it certainly sounds like something I would not be happy about. And then
So the
who knows
question
about these
becomes,
things?
and the problem is,
Who-
Chuck, I mean, especially the realtors in our audience, right? Those of us who have sold new construction, which most buyers agents do at some point in their career, you know that when you sit down in a model center, a realtor, a buyer, and the builder's representative, you gloss over that contract pretty quick, and every clause and component in that contract is positioned to be like candy to the buyer. Hey, don't worry about that. Hey, let's do this and that. No, I know that doesn't sound good, but everybody does it. And this is just the lawyers. You know what I mean? This is really not going to affect you. We just need you to sign right here, please. That's
Yes,
how it works if you've ever been in a model center. Because I got news for you. Not too many people like reading contracts, but it's really important that we do. Okay, Chuck?
yeah, for sure, absolutely sure. Well,
So these developer fees are bad and they need to be prohibited, in my opinion.
yeah, well, maybe there are a few other people out there that feel the same way.
And the Florida House should prioritize it and take it up so we can get it on the governor's desk, Chuck.
Sure. Now, could we encourage our listeners, our viewers, to contact Danny Perez and see if we can put some pressure on him to get some of these things taken care of?
We have until Friday, Chuck. That is not going to happen. With all due respect, why do we want to, and why do we want to get our audience hair on fire? Which they should be upset, but you're not going to get this done by Friday. And if you hold the session over, the focus is going to be on passing the budget. So I'm told, as I told you off air, Chuck, you were asking me, what are we going to do for what direction is our content going to go after the session ends? And I told you that we're going to start getting ready for the next session. And that's where we're going to get our people involved. We're going to start now preparing for committee weeks 2026 for the 2027 legislative session. That's where we'll take this up. So I hope that our audience will get involved and participate with us as we take a look at the entire chapters of law in the state of Florida that need revision, and we rewrite the entire chapter and walk into the committee weeks next October with legislation ready to go that reinvents, that rewrites the laws that are on the statutes that are on the books in Florida that need to be redrafted. And I've already got colleagues of mine and yours, Chuck, who are excited about getting started on that process immediately, Chuck. By now,
Awesome.
Chuck, I'm telling you something. If session starts and we haven't lobbied our legislature on the things that we want to support and oppose, we're way behind the eight ball. This stuff has to be worked out in committee weeks. So, July, August, September, these are the months where stuff actually gets done. And then you get into committee weeks where the legislature presents to the other legislators. And then we can figure out what we're going to do when we go into session early in the next year. So this is a problem that I have with the way we grassroots citizens manage our political interests, Chuck.
There you go. Well, our next bill is a little more local to the another area, the Ocklawaha River. There's a Ocklawaha River restoration bill which aims to remove a portion of a 2,000-foot earthen berm at the Kirkpatrick Dam to reconnect the Ocklawaha and Silver and St. Johns rivers. It sounds like a really nice thing. What do you have to say about that, Mike?
Well, it's really expensive. They built a dam here, right? I mean, this is a big deal, right? This is basically what happened years ago. I don't know how many years ago, but quite a few years ago, decades ago. I'm going to say 50 years roughly. And, we thought that it was a really good idea to reroute rivers. Oh, the river's running over here, but we'd really rather have the river run over there. So we get out our backhoe and we just redirect that water in a different direction. And then after we do that, of course, we realize that Mother Nature is much more powerful than us than man and bulldozer backhoe, right? And we create a whole bunch of problems for ourselves. We spend a lot of money creating problems for ourselves that 5 decades later we realize we have to fix. And that's kind of the situation we're in. There was another situation like this a couple of decades ago, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, where the Kissimmee River was under the same thing. The ranchers, cattle ranchers, and all the farmers and stuff like that had a really good idea and they wanted to reroute the Kissimmee River. Well, this is another example of that. And it's sad that we have to break it before we fix it. But that's what we're talking about right now. And I'm in favor of fixing it, Chuck. Are you?
Yeah, well, it makes sense. I mean, I think nature has a far better interest and understanding of what's best for our Earth. So yeah, I'm good with
Well,
that.
Chuck, it's so interesting because I'd like to make a biblical analysis on this thing here. And I would say that my life has gotten a lot better since I stopped trying to get God to agree with me and I started agreeing with God more.
It's funny
That's
how
a
that
real
goes,
game
Mike.
changer. If anybody hasn't tried it, you need to try that. So I would take the
Okay.
same analogy and I would apply it to this situation. We human beings, we've done a lot. We've come a long ways and we are pretty innovative on certain subjects, but it's probably a pretty good idea to subordinate to Mother Nature rather than trying to get Mother Nature to subordinate to us. That'd be my comment on that. So yes, I'm in favor of putting it back. And although this is a long-term, it's like a 30-year project, but that's good because it spends some money out over 30 years and certainly to pay for this up front, even though the state of Florida could do it, I'm sure, if we really wanted to. I mean, just think, the world could be a perfect place if we really wanted it to. We have so much money, but it's probably good to work on this project over time, Chuck.
Okay, well, we have a couple more we want to get through, and our time is beginning to dwindle. So this next one is local planning restrictions. It's these restrictions are legally binding rules, including zoning ordinances, building codes, environmental protections, and these regulations manage land use. And if I understand correctly, there's a bill wanting to roll back some of these rules. Why don't you give us your
That's
view on it?
correct. So we all know that the legislature over the last 3 or 4 legislative sessions, certainly back to, well, I mean, back to 1985 in reality. Well, let's see. Well, that's not correct, Chuck. In basically, there was in 1985 there was a law passed called the Growth Management Act, and it did a lot of really good things in order to get the state and the cities and the counties working together on growth management. But I'll just say it. With Rick Scott's governorship, we started undoing the Growth Management Act, which led to where we are today with the state having a very heavy hand over land use at the municipal and county level. And keep in mind that the legislation that the Senate passed exempts the Live Local Act. So that's, of course, Kathleen Passidomo is still in the Senate, and she was the impetus behind the Live Local Act, which severely limits municipalities and county governments' authority over particularly high density multifamily housing development. So, but anything we can do to peel back regulations that strip municipalities and counties from their fiduciary responsibilities to manage their jurisdictions, I'm in favor of. And then keep in mind, Chuck, as we announced last week, the South Lake Chamber of Commerce Public Affairs Committee passed a resolution on Thursday, March 5th, calling for the repeal of Senate Bill 180, which is another really good thing to do. So I'm in favor of all of this legislation that restores as much authority over local land use to cities and counties and minimizes the overreach of the state government into local land use issues, Chuck.
Okay, and now finally, with just a few minutes left, school voucher oversight. Um, it's driven by audits revealing that millions are missing funds. There's millions of dollars of funds missing. Rapid program expansion and it challenges the verifying student eligibility. What's going on here?
Chuck, this is a great opportunity for us to demonstrate that the Florida legislature and the governor's office often passes legislation that the base is really excited about, but they don't actually build out the implementation of the legislation. So a couple of sessions ago, we passed universal school choice, which is a great thing. Families should be able to choose where their kids go to school, and the per student appropriation to the should go with the student. So this is where we're finding that enrollment in public schools in most counties in Florida is down because families are choosing alternative to public school system for the education of their kids. But this particular bill, and then the parent gets to decide where that per student appropriation is applied. And the state of Florida is saying that the money's going out, but they don't know where it's going. So I do agree that the state of Florida should know where student appropriation money is going. So do you understand what I'm saying here? The state of Florida is dispersing money out to parents and schools, okay, under the universal school choice program, but they don't have a handle on how the money is being spent. And I think it's real. If you believe in public education, then it's very important to monitor where public funds that are directed towards public education are being spent in the marketplace, Chuck. So I'm going to support legislation that gives the state of Florida the ability to know how our public education money is being spent, Chuck.
There you go. Well, we are pretty much out of time, so why don't you give us a final wrap up, Mike?
Well, the final wrap up is that the legislative process is a waste of time if the Florida House and the Florida Senate don't cooperate with each other and work to advance the priorities of the two chambers, because in this bicameral system, nothing gets done if legislation doesn't pass between one house and the other. And you know what? If the Florida House disagrees with the legislative priorities of the Florida Senate, the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate need to get together and figure out what they do agree on. And if this legislation that we just covered is truly a disagreement on the priorities of the Florida legislature between the House and the Senate, then the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate need to get together and figure out what they could agree on so that they can get some productive legislation on the governor's desk, Chuck.
Well, thank you so much, Mike Levine, and thank you all for tuning in to our twice weekly live stream. Please follow us on Facebook at Restoring Our American Republic. Check us out on YouTube at Restoring Our American Republic ROAR. Please like and share the program. And remember, if you're unwilling to govern yourself, you will be governed by tyrants. Until next time, God bless you. God bless President Donald J. Trump, and God bless America.